Just sign it, Claire. My brother pushed the agreement across the conference table. I stared at the signature line. Transfer of ownership interest. My name was printed beneath it. My father's company. The company I had spent 11 years helping build. The company my father had once promised would always belong to the family. And now my own family wanted me to sign away my share for a fraction of what it was worth. I looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My brother Ethan leaned back in his chair. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I looked at him. No, I'm making sure I understand what you're asking me to do. We've already discussed it. You discussed it? His jaw tightened. You've been creating problems for months. What kind of problems? Questions? I almost laughed. Questions are problems now? My sister Lauren spoke quietly from the other end of the table. You've become obsessed with the finances. I looked at her. Because someone has been stealing from the company. Nobody moved. My mother finally raised her eyes. Enough. That single word carried more weight than anything Ethan had said. I looked around the room. My father's photograph hung behind my mother's chair. He was smiling in the picture. The same smile he had worn the day he handed me the first set of company keys. I remembered what he'd told me. Never sign anything you don't understand. So I pushed the agreement back. No. Ethan's expression changed. You're going to regret that. I didn't know how right he was. But I also didn't know how wrong he was. Because 3 years later, I would walk back into that same company. Not as an employee, not as a shareholder, not as the daughter they had pushed away. I would walk in as the woman who owned it. But before that happened, my family would leave me alone on a mountain in the middle of a winter storm, and they would believe the mountain would finish what they had started. They were wrong. Because sometimes the moment your family decides you're no longer worth saving is the exact moment you discover how much you're willing to fight for yourself. If you enjoy emotional stories about betrayal, family secrets, survival, and unexpected comebacks, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because this story didn't end when they left me behind. That was only where it began. My name is Claire Bennett. I grew up in a small town in Montana called Silver Ridge. It wasn't the kind of place people moved to for opportunity. People came there for the mountains, for the lakes, for the quiet, and sometimes because they wanted to disappear. My father, Thomas Bennett, was born there. He never wanted to leave. When I was 7 years old, he started a company called Bennett Alpine Logistics. At first, it was barely a company. It was one used truck, a rented garage, and my father's belief that he could build something better. Bennett Alpine transported mining equipment, construction materials, and industrial supplies through some of the most difficult terrain in the western United States. The work was dangerous. The roads were unpredictable. Winter could shut down an entire route in a matter of hours. But my father understood the mountains. More importantly, he understood people. If a driver was stranded, Dad went after him. If a customer couldn't pay on time, Dad worked with them. If an employee's truck broke down, Dad helped fix it himself. He used to say, "A company isn't trucks and buildings. It's people trusting you to show up." That sentence stayed with me. By the time I graduated from college, Bennett Alpine had grown into a serious regional company. We had more than 60 trucks, 3 distribution yards, almost 200 employees, and contracts with some of the largest construction and mining companies in the Northwest. My older brother Ethan worked there. My younger sister Lauren worked there too. But none of us worked there in the same way. Ethan loved being the boss. Lauren loved numbers. I loved solving problems. I started in dispatch, then operations, then logistics planning. Eventually, I became vice president of strategic development. My father never gave me the position because I was his daughter. He made me earn it. That mattered to me. But it bothered Ethan. He had always believed that because he was the oldest son, the company belonged to him. He never said it directly. He didn't have to. You could see it in the way he walked through the office. He spoke to employees like they worked for him personally. He parked in my father's old parking space. He used Dad's office even when Dad was still alive. And whenever we disagreed, Ethan would remind me, I'm the oldest. As if birth order were a business qualification. My father never agreed with him. That's why Ethan resented me. Because Dad trusted my judgment. Not more than he loved Ethan, but more than Ethan could tolerate. Then, 2 years before my father died, something happened that changed the company. A major national construction firm approached us about a 5-year logistics contract. It was worth more than $30 million. But there was a problem. We didn't have the technology to manage a contract that large. So I spent 18 months developing a new logistics platform. It tracked routes, fuel, driver hours, maintenance schedules, weather conditions, customer deliveries, everything. When we launched it, our operating costs dropped by almost 18%. The new contract was approved. Revenue exploded. My father was proud. One evening, after everyone had left, Dad and I stood outside the warehouse. Snow was falling. The trucks were lined up beneath the lights. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said, "You know what I'm most proud of?" I thought he was going to mention the contract. He didn't. "You could leave," he said. "What?" "You could work anywhere. Bigger companies, bigger cities. More money." He looked at me. "But you came back here." I smiled. "You needed help." He shook his head. "No, your family needed you." I didn't realize then how much those words would hurt later. My father died 18 months afterward. Heart attack. No warning. 1 minute he was reviewing a maintenance report. The next he was gone. The funeral filled the church. Employees stood outside in the snow. Customers flew in from other states. Hundreds of people came. I remember looking across the room and seeing Ethan. He wasn't crying. He was watching the company executives, watching the lawyers, watching who was talking to whom. Even at Dad's funeral, Ethan was calculating his future. I should have noticed. I didn't. 3 days after the funeral, my mother called a family meeting. She said Dad's estate plan was straightforward. Ethan would become CEO. Lauren would remain CFO. I would continue running strategic operations. We would all retain ownership. It sounded fair, so I agreed. For the first year, everything seemed fine. Then the numbers changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Profit margins started shrinking. Fuel expenses increased. Maintenance costs increased. Certain vendors became more expensive, but revenue remained strong. I couldn't understand it, so I started looking deeper. The first strange payment appeared in a vendor account. Rockwell Transport Consulting. I'd never heard of them. They were receiving nearly $60,000 every month. I asked Lauren about them. She didn't hesitate. Outside logistics consultants. Who hired them? Ethan. Why? She smiled. Ask him. I did. He became defensive. You don't need to know everything. I'm responsible for operations. And I'm CEO. That doesn't answer the question. He walked away. I should have investigated immediately. Instead, I trusted my family. That was my mistake. A few months later, I noticed another company, North Summit Equipment Services. They were charging us for vehicle maintenance. The prices were absurd. I compared their invoices with 3 other providers. North Summit was charging almost twice the market rate. Again, Lauren approved the payments. Again, Ethan had authorized the contract. Then I discovered the connection. North Summit was owned by a holding company. That holding company was registered to an address in Boise, and the registered manager was Ethan's wife's brother. I sat at my desk for almost an hour. I couldn't move. I kept staring at the documents. I wanted there to be another explanation. There wasn't. I pulled another vendor. Then another. The pattern was everywhere. Money was being moved out of Bennett Alpine through inflated contracts. Consulting fees, maintenance agreements, equipment purchases, temporary labor companies, insurance services, millions of dollars. I printed everything. Then I went to Lauren. I closed the door behind me. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. She didn't answer. Lauren. She sat down. You should stop. Stop what? Looking. I stared at her. Why? She whispered. Because you're going to get hurt. I felt cold. Are you involved? She looked away. That was my answer. I left her office. That night I couldn't sleep. At 2:17 in the morning, I received a message from my mother. We need to talk tomorrow. Family only. I didn't respond. The next morning, I hired an independent forensic accountant. I didn't tell anyone. 2 weeks later, he gave me his preliminary findings. He looked uncomfortable. Claire, this is bigger than vendor fraud. What do you mean? There are loans. What loans? Loans against company assets. How much? He slid the report toward me. I read the number. 17.8 million. I stared at it. How did I not know about this? Because they're not listed correctly in the internal reports. My stomach turned. Who signed them? He pointed to the page. Ethan, Lauren. And my mother. I couldn't breathe. My mother. The woman who had told me at Dad's funeral that family needed to stay together. The woman who had hugged me and promised we would protect Dad's legacy. She had signed the loans. I called her. She answered immediately. Claire, we need to talk. About what? The loans. Silence. Then she said, Come home. I went to her house. Ethan was already there. Lauren, too. The moment I walked inside, I knew. They weren't surprised. They were waiting. Ethan placed a folder on the table. Sit down. I didn't. What is this? You need to sign some documents. I opened the folder. My ownership interest. My voting rights. My executive position. Everything. They wanted me out. I looked at my mother. Why? She started crying. Because this company can't survive another fight. I stared at her. I'm not fighting. You've been investigating your brother. Because he's stealing. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. Watch yourself. I looked at him. Tell me I'm wrong. He didn't. Instead, he said, You've never understood what it takes to protect this family. Protect? You think Dad's company is more important than your family? No. I looked at the documents. I think stealing from employees is wrong. My mother whispered. Please sign. I pushed the papers away. No. Ethan leaned toward me. You have until Friday. Or what? He smiled. You'll find out. I should have gone directly to the police. I should have gone to the bank. I should have called every employee, but I still had one weakness. I wanted to believe my family could be saved. So when my mother called 3 days later and invited me to the family cabin, I went. The cabin was on Mount Helena. Dad had bought it when we were children. Every winter we went there together. He loved the place. It was where he taught us to ski, where he taught us how to read weather patterns, where he taught us never to underestimate the mountains. The invitation said, We need to talk without lawyers. I believed her. That was my second mistake. We arrived Friday afternoon. The weather was already changing. Heavy clouds were gathering over the ridge. I asked Ethan if the roads were safe. He laughed. It's Montana. It'll be fine. That night we had dinner. Nobody talked about the company. Nobody mentioned the audit. For a few hours, I almost believed things could go back to normal. The next morning, Ethan suggested we hike to the old overlook. Dad's favorite place. I hesitated. Then my mother said, Your father would have wanted us together. So I went. The trail was covered with fresh snow. The wind was stronger than expected. About 2 miles from the cabin, Ethan stopped. He took a folder from his backpack. My heart sank. Sign it. I stared at him. Here? You've had enough time. No. Claire. No. He stepped closer. You don't understand what happens if the bank calls the loans. I looked at him. You created those loans. You'll destroy the company. No, you did. He stared at me. Then something happened that I will never forget. He smiled. Not angrily. Not nervously. Calmly. Like someone who had already won. You really think you're going back to the cabin? I looked around. My mother was standing behind him. Lauren was beside her. I suddenly noticed something. None of them were carrying their backpacks anymore. They had given them to Ethan. I looked down at my own bag. My phone was inside. My keys. My wallet. My emergency supplies. Ethan reached for it. What are you doing? Give me the bag. No. He grabbed it. I pulled back. The strap broke. My bag fell into the snow. My phone slid several feet away. I ran toward it. Ethan stepped on it. The screen shattered. I looked at him. Why? He didn't answer. My mother did. Because you're not listening. I felt something inside me collapse. Mom? She looked at me. You're going to stay here tonight. I stared at her. What? The weather will force the search teams to wait. I couldn't understand what she was saying. Then I did. You're leaving me? Nobody answered. Lauren began crying. I didn't want this. I looked at her. But you're doing it. Ethan picked up my keys. My mother's voice trembled. If you come back, you'll destroy everything. I stared at her. You're leaving me on this mountain because I won't sign over my company? She said nothing. Ethan turned away. They started walking. I screamed. Mom! She stopped. For 1 second, I thought she would turn around. She didn't. She simply said, I'm sorry. Then they disappeared down the trail. I stood alone in the snow. No phone. No food. No proper shelter. No way to contact anyone. And the storm was coming. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe 20. Eventually, the cold forced me to move. I remembered something my father had taught me when I was 12. If you get lost in the mountains, don't fight the mountain. Find shelter. So I started looking. I moved downhill. Slowly. The snow reached my knees in places. The wind became stronger. My fingers went numb. I kept moving. Then I saw something. A dark shape beneath the trees. An old ranger shelter. It was barely standing, but it had 4 walls. I crawled inside. There was no firewood. No food. But there was a metal emergency container. Inside was an old flare. 2 thermal blankets. And 1 bottle of water. I almost cried. Not because I was safe. Because my father had taught me exactly what to look for. I wrapped myself in the blanket. Then I waited. The storm lasted through the night. And into the next day. At one point, I heard a helicopter. I screamed. But the wind swallowed the sound. I realized my family probably hadn't reported me missing. Not yet, because if they reported me missing too soon, questions would be asked. So I waited. And waited. On the 3rd morning, I heard voices. I crawled outside. A search team was moving through the trees. One of them saw me. She's alive! They reached me within minutes. I was severely dehydrated. My right foot was badly frostbitten. I had hypothermia. But I was alive. The hospital called my family. Ethan arrived first. He looked devastated. He told police that I had become emotional during the hike and walked away. My mother said she believed I had gone toward another trail. Lauren cried. Their story was almost perfect. Almost. Because there was one thing they didn't know. The ranger who found me had a body camera. And during the rescue, he had asked me one question. Who left you out here? I told him. All of them. The police investigated. But without direct evidence, the case became complicated. My family hired lawyers. They claimed I had misunderstood what happened. The forensic accountant gave my attorney the financial records. The case became a corporate investigation. But I didn't want to spend the rest of my life fighting them in court. I wanted out. So I did something nobody expected. I disappeared. Not because I was defeated. Because I needed time. I moved to Oregon. I changed my phone number. I rented a tiny apartment. And for the first 6 months, I did almost nothing. I healed. Physically. Emotionally. Then one morning, I opened my father's old notebook. He had given it to me years earlier. Inside were notes about business. Suppliers. Customers. Ideas. And one sentence underlined twice. Never build a company that depends on one person. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I started building. My new company was called Northridge Supply Systems. I started with 1 employee. Then 3. Then 8. We helped regional construction companies reduce logistics costs. I knew the industry. I knew the problems. And I knew exactly what my family had done wrong. Northridge was transparent. Every contract was documented. Every supplier was audited. Every employee could see how performance was measured. Within 2 years, we had clients in 6 states. By the third year, our revenue passed $40 million, and then I received an email. Bennett Alpine Logistics was in trouble. The bank had called its loans. Customers were leaving. The company had lost almost half its major contracts. Ethan had sold 2 warehouses. Lauren had resigned. My mother had stopped attending board meetings. The company my father had built was collapsing. Then my attorney called. "There's an acquisition opportunity." I knew immediately what he meant. "How much?" He gave me the number. I laughed. It was less than a third of what the company had been worth when my father died. "Who else is bidding?" 3 investment firms. "Make an offer." My attorney hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." 2 weeks later, Northridge submitted a bid. Ethan rejected it. He didn't know who was behind the offer. The acquisition company had been structured through a holding group. He had no idea it was mine. Another bidder offered more. I offered more. Then the bank rejected their financing. The other bidder disappeared. Ethan had no choice. The final meeting was scheduled at the company's headquarters. I walked into the building wearing a gray suit. Nobody recognized me at first. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" I smiled. "I'm here for the acquisition meeting." She checked her computer. "Name?" "Claire Bennett." Her face changed. She stood. "I'll get Mr. Bennett." A few minutes later, Ethan walked through the hallway. He stopped when he saw me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "You." I nodded. "Me." He looked at the papers in my hand. "You bought the company?" "I bought the debt." His face went pale. "The acquisition isn't final." "It is." I handed him the documents. He read them. Then he looked at me. "Why?" I thought about the mountain, the storm, my mother's voice. "If you come back, you'll destroy everything." I shook my head. "I didn't come back to destroy anything." "Then why?" I looked through the glass wall at the employees. "Because Dad built something worth saving." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "You hate me." "I did." He looked down. "And now?" I took a breath. "Now I don't want to spend another minute being controlled by what you did." I became the new owner. Not because I had taken revenge. Because I had built something stronger. I kept most of the employees. I restored the retirement accounts that had been frozen. I paid the vendors. I reopened the warehouses. And I changed the name. Bennett Alpine Logistics became Northridge Alpine Systems. My father's name wasn't erased. But neither was my story. A year later, I went back to Mount Helena. Alone. The trail looked smaller than I remembered. I reached the place where they had left me. The trees were covered in snow. The mountain was quiet. I stood there for several minutes. Then I realized something. 3 years earlier, I had believed my family had left me on that mountain because they wanted me to die. Maybe they had. But they had also accidentally given me something. Freedom. They had taken my phone, my keys, my position, my company, my family, but they had not taken my ability to begin again. I took a small piece of paper from my pocket. It contained one sentence. Something my father used to say. "Keep moving." I folded it and placed it beneath a stone. Then I turned around. I didn't look back. Because the woman who had climbed that mountain 3 years earlier had been desperate to be accepted by her family. The woman walking down that trail no longer needed them. She had learned the difference between being loved and being used. She had learned that family is not defined by blood. It's defined by what people do when you have nothing left to offer them. And most importantly, she had learned that losing everything doesn't mean you have lost yourself. Sometimes it means you've finally been given the chance to discover yourself. My family thought they were leaving me behind. They thought the mountain would erase me. Instead, the mountain gave me 3 things: time, clarity, and a reason to build something they could never control. 3 years later, I didn't return to ask for my place. I returned because I had built my own. And when I walked into their company again, I wasn't the daughter they had abandoned. I was the owner. If someone has ever made you feel like you're worthless because they thought they could take everything from you, remember this. They can take your position. They can take your money. They can close a door. They can even walk away from you. But they cannot decide how your story ends. You do that. So keep moving, keep building, keep becoming. Because sometimes the people who push you away are unknowingly pushing you toward the life you were always meant to live. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the greatest comeback isn't proving your enemies wrong. It's becoming so strong that their opinion no longer matters.